let's start off with Christian Kirk. The former Cardinal is going to test free agency. We know, the Cardinals are also looking for wide receivers, but Kirk might not be back with them. So I feel like he's one of the more underutilized wide receivers. He's played on the outside. He's played in the slot. Drake, where do you see Christian Kirk ending up as far as his skill set, being able to go inside and outside? We know there's a lot of teams that again need wide receivers, but where do you think he ends up?
I'm a big fan of Christian Kirk. I just did a video on YouTube where I talked about some under the radar wide receivers, guys who PFF didn't have in the top 8 of free agent wide receivers. And Christian Kirk somehow didn't fall into that top 8. But I mean, you look at last year, 77 catches, over 900 yards, 5 touchdowns, 17th in the NFL in yards per target. Initially, I thought he would be a great fit for the New Orleans Saints. You could put him kind of outside with Michael Thomas on their side. They need help down there. But then I realized, oh, wait, the Saints don't have any money. So we've got to find somewhere else for him to go. And then the Cleveland Browns popped into my mind. There's obviously no Odell Beckham. He's long gone. Jarvis Landry, not long for the world there on Lake Erie. So they're going to need somebody to help Donovan Peoples-Jones out there. And I could see that being one of those spots where Christian Kirk comes in. We're going to see the numbers on the contract. We're going to be like, oh my God, Christian Kirk just got paid. But you got to have somebody out there to catch the football. And they got to try to make this Baker Mayfield thing work. So I like Christian Kirk going to Cleveland and disappointing everybody in fantasy because Baker Mayfield sucks.
I like it.
Who's got, you want me to go? So for me, I have going to the Falcons, and for kind of a lot of reasons that Drake pointed out, which is that he's a guy that started out in the slot when they had issues a couple of years ago. They moved him out wide where he had the 3 touchdown game right away, and they kind of kept him out there for a while. This year they brought him back into the slot. He's shown that he can play both flanker and slot, probably not big enough to play split end. So with the Falcons, you've got Kyle Pitts, who's this, obviously he's 6'6". 240, whatever. He can play both split end. He can play in the slot. He can play inline, and he can play a tethered position each time. So a lot like Michael Thomas does, right? Even when you put him in the slot, he's tethered to the line. He can beat the jam. You're not worried about guys holding him up because he's got size. Kyle Pitts is always likely going to be tethered. So you can take Christian Kirk and put him at flanker, put him at slot, have him go in motion, have him do the things that he's better at than, a team that's going to try and make him their number 1 wide receiver where he's, lined up, tethered to the line, facing the jam. So I think the Falcons are a good fit, and especially because I don't think Kirk's going to be as expensive as a lot of these other guys, and the Falcons don't really have as much money as, say, the Lions or some of these other teams that are, that have money coming out their ears, like the Chargers,
Yeah, I think I think both of those spots are pretty good. I mean, the Browns, who knows what's going to happen with Jarvis Landry, certainly, if he ends up leaving, other than that, you got those 2 tight ends. Who knows if they even can get out of Austin Hooper's contract too, because obviously they franchise tagged David Njoku, to the dismay of a lot of people who thought that he could, especially in fantasy, that if he landed somewhere else, that he could run a ton of routes. It could certainly be a top 12 tight end in fantasy, depending on where he landed. And then, the Falcons, I think it's a really good landing spot too. I think he goes to the Bills. I think that's a really good ready-made spot for him with Josh Allen. They're likely not bringing back, Beasley. Emmanuel Sanders is free agent as well. So, Gabe Davis, Stephon Diggs, Kirk, Knox. I think that quartet, Buffalo is going to definitely improve somewhere, whether they draft a wide receiver, pick one up in free agency, whatever they're going to do. Maybe they add a running back. We'll talk about that as well too. But I think the Bills are a really good spot for Christian Kirk. It's still going to be his fantasy value is not really going to change, even if he goes just based on the mouths to feed there versus his, I would say, underutilization in Arizona. But I think for a more football sense, I think Christian Kirk is going to provide a lot more than he would in fantasy. But I like the Bills as a landing spot for him.
Yeah, so I initially had the Bills, and then I shied away from it because that was the first thing that I looked, and I was like, I even wrote on the show sheet, Kevin, you stole it from me. So then I pivoted to the Falcons. So it's interesting that both of you guys kind of share my sentiments. But in addition to what you said, Coop, the Falcons ranked 8th in pass play percentage in 2021. I don't know if this needs to be said, if anybody's been living under a rock, but Calvin Ridley is a no-go for this season, possibly for the rest of his career, depending on how seriously the league wants to take it. And I think with that little of competition, Kirk's presence and skill set could be beneficial for both him and Kyle Pitts, and they could both be fantasy relevant. So, but I like either one of those. Drake, I hate it. I hate going to Cleveland. I think that's where receivers go to die. Ugh.
Yeah, I don't think it's a great spot for fantasy. I just look at it in terms of, well, they have to pay somebody to come there and play. And I want to ask you guys this, because we know there's a plethora of really good young wide receivers in this draft. And there's a lot of kind of, we'll call them mid-range wide receivers here in fantasy, in free agency. So it's like, do you want to pay, I don't know, $10 million a year to Christian Kirk, or just say, you know what, I'm going to fire 2 bullets in the draft in the second and fourth at some of these guys, and we'll see what sticks? Because, I mean, is Christian Kirk, if he's your 1, is that really a difference maker for your team? Like, I don't think so. Like, you want him as your 2. Like, that's why I initially thought in New Orleans, if you had Michael Thomas on one side and then you had Christian Kirk there, like, that's a really nice fit. But, again, they got to free up a little cash. But yeah, what do you guys think about that with this free agent class? But also, hey, there's a bazillion good rookies coming in.
Well, I think it really depends on where you are in the cycle, right? Because it's like, you go for it, and then there's teams that are kind of rebuilding. If you're going for it now, especially like, for instance, you bring up the Browns, right? And Kev mentioned how you have 2 tight end sets. I talked about how he's not a good split end, but with 2 tight ends, you don't need anyone that's split end, anyone tethered to the line, right? Yep. So if you bring in a rookie, the issue you run into, and this is exactly what the Cardinals ran into last year with Rondale Moore, is that these rookies typically, I mean, some of them are 21 years old. So they're not big enough. They can't block. Yeah. That's exactly it. So with Christian Kirk, I mean, if you go back and look at the highlights for Rondale Moore on multiple of his big plays, Christian Kirk was the guy out front laying the block on the screen or laying the block on another play that sprung Rondale Moore. So if you're the Browns, who reportedly made Jarvis Landry gain like 10 to 15 pounds when he got there to help with blocking, like, you're looking at these guys saying, we're competing right now, and we need somebody that can block right now because we're a running team. So that's a team where I think Christian Kirk makes sense because of the overall package. But like you said, if you're a team that's looking for a guy that can get 150 targets and change the future of your team, that's probably not Christian Kirk.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
Well, and Landry and Kirk both. Oh, sorry, Kev. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say that Landry and Kirk both tend to work out of the slot too. So, like, where are you going to move one or the other? Like, where is the other skill set?
Well, that's the beauty. Situation? That's the beauty of the 2 tight end sets. I mean, that's what the Colts did for years when they had T.Y. Hilton, who's only like 5'10". He's not a very big dude, under 200 pounds. And instead of having a split end, they tried Andre Johnson, they tried DeVries Fountain, they tried all these different guys. Who was the guy that they got a guy break his leg? They tried Kelvin Benjamin briefly. You know what I mean? Like, they were looking for a split end, but they didn't have one, so they just used 2 tight ends and flankers. So if you have 2 tight ends, both these guys can play off the line, playing flanker and slot, kind of rotating around. You don't really need to have, I mean, plus they have Donovan Peoples-Jones anyway if they want to use a split end. So you don't really need to have a real differentiation outside of that.